Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today as someone who is deeply concerned about the racial disparities that we see in our education system. And, you know, we've been confronted once again in this country with the fact that things are not equal and that, as my colleague said, race does matter. But as I stand and consider this measure, I can't say that Prop 209 is the problem. It's much deeper than that when we look at that. And I appreciate the comments that have been stated here on this floor today and the experiences that my colleagues have shared today. Those are important. And it's important that we have this discussion to talk about how do we get to the root causes of the inequities that we can see very clearly in our education system. But I say that Prop 209 is not the problem. When we look at the stats, that getting rid of racial preferences did not actually lead to decreases. It actually led to increases in Latino students being admitted. It led to increases in Asian American students being admitted. But when you look at the stats, admissions of black students remain stagnant in the UC system, 4%. There hasn't been progress there. That's a problem. But let's go a little bit deeper. It's not just about admission, because let's talk about what's going on in retaining students while they're in higher education. The stats show that 38% of black students graduate in 4 years from a UC system. In CSU, it's even worse, it's 8%. So you can talk about admissions and bringing back affirmative action, but what are we doing to ensure that black and brown students graduate and get that education? That's a conversation that we need to be happening. We need to go even deeper. But let's take it even to the next level, because this starts way before higher education. And as one of my colleagues says, it does matter where you live. It does matter what your zip code is. And in our K through 12 education system, many of us have long recognized that we have some serious racial disparities. And some of us have advocated for reforms that would actually deal with that very issue. And this is not something new. 9 minority students stood up and brought a lawsuit against the state of California because of these problems in our educational system. And this state government fought them tooth and nail in the Vergara versus California decision. Governor Jerry Brown fought them tooth and nail, saying, no, we're going to keep those systems in place. And the author of this legislation brought her own legislation saying, we are going to change tenure, for example. And this legislative body killed that legislation. The changes that minority students are bringing to us, saying, please change these things to give us better opportunities, to make it so that it's not where our zip code is, that it's not my race that determines my success and my ability to get an education. The things that they brought to us, this body killed in this building, despite the efforts of a lot of people in this room. But the bottom line is the majority said no. So it's a lot deeper than just talking about Prop 209. It's talking about a first in, first out policy that we have for teachers. It's talking about an LA Unified, in that trial, expert witnesses testified that black and Latino students were many times over percentage-wise likely to be taught by a teacher in the 5% effectiveness rate.
30 seconds.
The lowest 5%. I'll give you those stats. African American students were 43% more likely than white students to be taught by a teacher in the bottom 5%. Latino students are 68% more likely to have a teacher in the bottom 5% of effectiveness in LA Unified. That's the problem. And that is showing itself all the way up and way before we get to higher education, way before we get to admissions. So this body needs to start doing things about this, and it's had the opportunity. And don't tell me today that it's 209, and if you're not on board with getting rid of 209, you're not about trying to get equity in education, because there's a whole lot more that we need to do.
Please conclude.
And we've had the opportunity to do it in this body. And I would say let's continue this conversation. It's much needed. It shouldn't take what's happened for us to have these conversations. But let's really get to the root causes of what's going on with education and the racial disparities we're seeing in this country. I'm ready to work on those issues. But I can't support what's a cover-up of those issues of just saying, well, it's about 209, and let's eliminate that. Let's get to the root causes of this issue.